Hello and welcome to this Kreston International webinar on demand. This webinar covers the Kreston International Independence Policies and Procedures. This webinar should be reviewed by all individuals that are responsible for dealing with Kreston International independence checks and should also be used as part of training for all staff to ensure they understand the requirements of the Kreston International Independence Policies and Procedures. Firstly, I want to start off by giving a perspective to where Kreston sits in the terms of the international ethics codes. The independence codes depend on Kreston's status as a network of independent accounting firms. Kreston International is a member of the Forum of Firms, which is an association under the IFAC banner. And in order to become a member of the Forum of Firms, a network must actually be identified as a network due to its structure, such as quality control reviews and some elements of common standards and approaches. So, as a member of the Forum of Firms, Kreston International is a network and therefore is expected to comply with the requirements of the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants Code of Ethics that deal with the position of network firms. Firms can be subject to independence requirements from a number of sources. As I said, the Kreston International requirements come from the IASMA code and are in line with that code. We do not require any additional independence policies in addition to those included within the IASMA code. In some jurisdictions, the local code may be weaker than that in the IASMA code, and there are some countries where additional restrictions that are not in the IASMA code apply to firms and their clients. So, how does this impact on the approach within Kreston to independence? Well, as I said, as a minimum, all firms must follow the IASMA code. This is the baseline that we expect all firms to comply with. If in your local jurisdiction there is a weaker local code which allows you to do some activities which would be outlawed by the IASMA code, such as providing some non-assurance accounting services to a listed entity, then as a member of the Forum of Firms, you are not allowed to take advantage of that local code, and you must follow the IASMA code in all cases. Obviously, there are some jurisdictions where there is no locally established code of ethics for professional accounting firms, and again, in that case, the IASMA code must be followed. Finally, there are some countries where the local codes are stronger than the requirements of the IASMA code. This may be particularly around public interest entities, but can apply in certain circumstances to the provision of non-audit services to non-listed clients who are audited by the firm. In these cases, the firm itself must ensure that it follows the stronger local code in all its activities, and this can impact on other Kreston member firms. So, for example, an accounting service that could be provided under the IASMA code to a subsidiary of a private company may, in some circumstances, depending on the jurisdiction covering that private parent company, may not be allowable, and therefore it's important to remember that those stronger local codes must be applied where required. Just to complete the picture of in terms of what is a network and what the requirements for a network are, this is an extract from the IASMA code, and the basic requirement is that a network firm shall be independent of the audit clients of other firms within the network as required by the relevant part of the code. The code highlights a number of areas of risk in terms of independence. The first is a firm holding an investment in an audit client of another member firm. Secondly, there is the provision of incompatible non-audit services to an audit client of another Kreston member firm. There could be the provision of audit services to an entity where actually other Kreston member firms are already providing non-audit services to that client or to a subsidiary of that client, which are incompatible with the provision of audit services. In certain cases, members of a firm may hold personal appointments, which can create independence issues. And finally, there can be circumstances where there is a conflict between services being provided to different clients by different members of the network. This webinar is only dealing with the independence issues. There are a whole range of other independence and ethics requirements that must be followed by firms, which are outlined in the ISMA code, and all of these should be followed by firms. As I say, this webinar is specifically looking at the independence requirements as they apply within the network. So if we look at some of these risks to independence individually, firstly, firms holding an investment. The basic requirement is that a direct or indirect material financial interest shall not be held by the firm or a network firm. There are then other requirements regarding individuals that may be associated with the firm actually carrying out the audit, but we are looking just at the network firm requirement. So as I say, there's a requirement that a direct financial interest is not held. How do we mitigate against that risk? Kreston International maintains a list of public interest entities, which will include all listed entities which are audited by member firms of Kreston. It is unusual for firms to hold investments directly, but the details of the code should be read to identify situations where investments may be held. But firms should check the PI list before looking to make any investment in an entity to ensure it is not an existing client of a Kreston member firm and that member firm is providing audit services. Firms are responsible for ensuring the PI list is up to date for their audit clients, and this data is collected through the annual fact sheet exercise, and individual updates can be provided to the International Office as changes arise. What about the provision of incompatible non-audit services? What are those non-audit services? Well, it depends on the structure and nature of the client. In the case of a listed entity, virtually all services could give rise to an independence issue, such as the provision of accounting services to a subsidiary. But in non-listed cases, it could be the provision of items such as valuation services or tax services, which give rise to an incompatible non-audit service. So Kreston has a clear policy in this area, and that's before accepting an engagement to provide non-assurance services, non-audit services, a member firm must carry out the following activities. Establish whether the entity is an audit client of a Kreston International member firm or is a subsidiary of an audit client of a Kreston International member firm. This information will generally be available from the published accounts of the entity or other public records. It is certainly not sufficient to check only the public interest entity, as this requirement applies to all non-audit services to all types of entity. And as I say, the public interest entity only contains those entities that are defined as public interest under local definitions or by the firm, and principally includes listed clients. And as I say, these non-audit service requirements apply to all potential clients. If yes, i.e. the subsidiary or the parent is audited by a Kreston member firm, then contact can be made directly with the audit partner, and this should be done in advance of accepting the engagement. This is to enable the threats to audit independence to be assessed, including threats which may arise under the stronger local code of ethics compared to the IESMA code, and, if required, agree appropriate safeguards, or in some cases it may be determined that the service cannot be provided to the client. Now, it may be that the name of the audit firm or the audit partner is not available either from the entity or on public record. And if that's the case, then the engagement partner should contact the Kreston International office, either myself or Katarzyna or Shinshin, who will be able to contact the head of audit in the member firm and request that they identify the audit partner. In the event that the audit partner and the engagement partner for the non-assurance service are unable to agree a way forward, then again the audit partner should contact the Kreston International office, and we will arrange to appoint an individual to mediate between the respective member firms. In the unusual circumstances where it's not possible to confirm the identity of the parent auditor or the subsidiary auditor, perhaps because information is not publicly available and the client is unwilling or unable to provide the information, then a targeted independence check should be requested from the international office. The independence request form is available on the portal or can be obtained from the international office. This form will request sufficient detail to enable the check to be carried out, the name of the country and the entity being looked at, and the international office will send this to the relevant firms to enable the identification of any potential incompatible non-audit or assurance services. Obviously, once this check has been completed, any findings should be documented and retained on the audit file as part of the client acceptance documentation, or, as say in the case of providing non-audit services, on the non-audit services file to confirm that appropriate independence checks have been performed. So what about the other situation where a firm is looking to provide audit services and non-audit or non-assurance services are already being provided? Kreston again has a policy in this area, which is that before accepting an audit engagement, a member firm should consider whether any non-assurance services provided to the entity by member firms create a threat to independence. This consideration will look at issues such as the geographic scope of the client and its subsidiary undertakings, the nature of the client itself, and as whether the provision of non-assurance services could or would create a potential independence issue under the code, and the information that is available from the client itself. If the potential audit partner determines that a Kreston International independence check is appropriate, then the independence check form should be completed and submitted to the international office. We will then contact the independence partner in each of the agreed locations and request that they contact the engagement partner through the automated system to notify them of any non-assurance services that are being provided. The process also records all responses confirming that no services are provided, and this process is managed online. The Kreston system is designed that this check only needs to be carried out the first time that a service is taken on and engaged for, as at any subsequent period, a firm taking on, in this case, a non-audit service elsewhere in the world, should be carrying out a conflict check which would identify that a Kreston member firm is the auditor of the parent undertaking. However, local regulation may require checks to be carried out on a more regular basis, or the firm's risk management procedures may determine that in certain cases checks need to be performed more frequently. What about holding personal appointments? In some cases, partners or senior employees may be requested to accept positions such as director, company secretary, or trustee with a client. Those appointments can either be accepted in a personal capacity or via the firm. The firm should have processes in place to gather information on these appointments to ensure that the risks can be managed, both within their own client base and on the wider context within Kreston International. But these appointments are in effect non-assurance services, and they can give rise to a risk of independence issues arising. And so they are considered to be non-audit or non-assurance services. As such, the requirements of the non-audit service provision policy should be followed, and the identity of the auditors within the parent and subsidiary entities identified, and if appropriate, contact made to confirm whether or not the position can be accepted. It is not normally possible to implement safeguards in situations where positions such as director or company secretary or trustee are being accepted, because these positions imply the ability to have some influence over the financial statements, which are then subject to audit by another Kreston member firm. And so firms should have records of the personal appointments held by their directors, partners, and senior employees. This is usually confirmed via an annual independence confirmation. Indeed, this should apply to all members of staff as well. It is just more unusual for them to be asked to accept an appointment with a client, although they may hold interests and investments in entities in their own personal capacity. What about conflicting services to different clients? The ISBA code identifies that a conflict may arise where acting for two or more parties whose interests are in conflict, or there is a conflict between the interests of the professional accountant and the party to which professional services are being provided. These conflicts will often arise within the firm itself, and Kreston International will not need to be involved, but in certain circumstances they can arise across borders and across entities, and therefore they may impact on the Kreston International network. What are the requirements in respect to these sorts of conflict of interest potential services? Well, in this case, the engagement partner shall exercise professional judgment to determine whether a conflict of interest check is required across the Kreston International network. There is further guidance within the ISBA code, but again, as mentioned, that will depend on issues such as the scope of the work, the type of services being provided, the sensitivity of the work being undertaken between the two clients. Where a Kreston International conflict of interest check is required in these circumstances, these can be carried out without revealing the name of the member firm requesting the check, to provide further safeguards against the exposure of information regarding potential sensitive matters. And if two parties are involved in the check, those checks will be carried out independently so that the connection between the parties is not disclosed to member firms receiving the conflict check. There are a wide number of examples of situations in which conflicts of interest may arise, and those are listed in the next two slides. I'm not going to go through everyone individually, and indeed this is not a complete list of the types of situation where a conflict may arise. But examples of where a Kreston conflict possibly are more likely to arise could be situations such as advising two clients at the same time who are looking to acquire and are competing to acquire the same company. That could be entities from different countries, both of whom are advised by Kreston International firms. Preparing valuations of assets for two parties who are in adversarial position with respect to those assets. Again, that could be two entities which are both clients of Kreston firms, The adversarial aspect brings into play a more likely conflict of interest there. And as I say, there are a number of other examples there of situations where a potential conflict of interest could arise. But please remember, these are not comprehensive and other situations could arise, so therefore it is important to understand what a conflict of interest actually looks like. And in terms of the consideration, there is further guidance if needed within the Code of Ethics as to the situations where carrying out a more detailed conflict check may be appropriate. So let's have a look at a couple of situations and help you to think about what actions you may need to take as the firm. So you're a member firm in Brazil and a local contact has approached you to consider undertaking the accounting work. They are the local subsidiary of a company based in Frankfurt, Germany. As a potential engagement partner in the firm in Brazil, what action do you need to take? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about your response to this question, and then I will talk through the steps that are required under the Kreston policies and procedures. Okay, so hopefully you've reached a conclusion. If you want to think about this for a bit longer, you can always pause this webinar, but I'm now going to give you the actions that you should take. So this is the provision of a non-assurance service, an accounting function. You're not providing audit to the company. So the first steps to take is to establish who is the auditor of the company and the parent undertaking in Frankfurt in Germany. And so this information may be available from the company itself or from publicly available information if the company, for example, publishes its accounts. If that research indicates that the auditor is not a member of Kreston International, then you are able to consider accepting that engagement. If the company is audited by a Kreston International member firm in Germany, then you will need to contact the engagement partner to determine whether you're actually able to undertake that accounting work without creating an independence issue for the German member when it undertakes the audit work. If you're unable to identify the audit partner or the audit firm, then you can contact the international office and we can carry out an independence check or contact the engagement partner. So, as I hopefully you'll be able to identify who the engagement partner is and will be able to undertake those checks directly. Okay, in a different situation now. So you're the partner in a Kreston member firm which is invited to act as auditor to a company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And the company has subsidiaries in a large number of countries around the world. What action do you as the firm or the engagement partner need to take as part of your independence consideration? Again, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to ponder your answer and then I'll come back with the required Kreston procedures. Again, you can pause the webinar if you would like to think about this answer for a bit longer. As the auditor of the company, and certainly a listed company, you would be concerned that there could be Kreston member firms providing services to one or a number of the subsidiaries in a number of different countries. It may be difficult to obtain this information from the company itself, as decisions on the appointment of local advisors may be taken at a local level, and they may be providing services other than audit services. Therefore, in these circumstances, it's likely that you will complete the Kreston Independence Check request form, send that to the international office, and the international office will then start an independence check with all the relevant countries to try and identify any services that are being provided by Kreston firms to subsidiaries of the listed entity. The engagement partner will receive notification of any services being provided, and then consideration can then be made against the ISMA code and the local code of ethics, which in this case is stronger than the ISMA code, to determine whether there are any threats to independence and whether those can be managed, or whether different actions are required in that respect. So we've looked at raising independence and conflict of interest checks and when you might need to do those and the actions that are required when you're accepting an appointment. The other aspect of the independence policies and procedures are what you need to do in order to respond to an independence check request. The Kreston Independence Check system is fully automated and works through a web-based system. And so requests will be received by nominated individuals at the firm. These checks will detail the services that are likely to be provided by the requester and the name of any entities within the country being checked and any further details that are needed to be confirmed. Requests will be received by email with a link to an online response platform. When you, if you are the recipient of checks, have performed the appropriate internal checks, a response should be made, either no conflict, in which case no further action is required, or that there is a potential conflict. In this case, you will need to provide details of the services provided or the relationship held. And this is all done online. If you believe that the requesting firm already know that you are providing services, for example, you may be a component auditor and report to them, if you receive a conflict check, you should still respond that you have a potential conflict and detail the services being provided. This will just ensure that a full record is retained of the services being provided within Kreston International. As I say, if a potential conflict is identified, the engagement partner will be notified automatically, and they will then take steps to consider the threats to independence or to agree steps to manage the risk of provision of the non-assurance services. Or, in certain circumstances, a decision may need to be reached on which service can be provided to the client. And as I say, in certain rare circumstances, the international office may need to get involved in making that determination using an objective independent partner to mediate. The most important thing is that independence checks received are responded to as a matter of priority, ideally within 24 hours, but definitely as soon as possible. Independence checks generally arise in two cases. Either it is a potential new client for a firm, and therefore they will be keen, and the client themselves will be keen to conclude the position on independence so that engagement processes can be completed, or they will be required to enable a firm to continue with or start professional services work or to complete professional services work, and therefore delays in responding to an independence check can delay the ability of a firm to deliver on its engagement and to raise its fee invoice to the client. So as I say, therefore, it is very important that independence checks are responded to promptly and that you have processes in place to ensure that if the nominated individual is not available, an alternative contact will receive emails and be able to respond to conflict checks. If you wish to add people to receiving of conflict checks, then please contact the international office and we can help with that process to ensure the right people are set up within your firm to receive conflict of interest checks. So what do you actually have to do before you can respond to an independence check request? Well, basic requirement is that you check your firm's client and contact database or equivalent records. This will enable you, hopefully, to identify any services that are being provided to the entity detailed on the check request, or any other contacts that you may have with that entity, which you feel it is appropriate to draw to the attention of the engagement partner. You should also check, if not recorded on your client data or contact database, any personal appointments which are held by members of your firm, to ensure that those themselves are not giving rise to potential independence issues, and again reporting those through the online system directly to the engagement partner. And if your systems are not providing sufficient information from your central databases and information held, then you may need to make direct inquiries of the partners in order to ensure that a complete response is made to the conflict check. Obviously, it's important to ensure, therefore, that your contact database and equivalent records are maintained on an up-to-date and current basis. So what other steps are required in respect to the Kreston independence policies and procedures? Well, it's important to ensure your client acceptance procedures are up to date and include questions that will ensure consideration of the Kreston international independence policies. You need to ensure that both your audit and non-audit or non-assurance staff are aware of the requirements and the forms that are required and the steps that are needed to ensure that independence is safeguarded. This is likely to include regular training on independence and ethical issues. And you need to make sure that your PI list is up to date to ensure that any listed entities are identifiable, and therefore firms will not be in a position where they take investments in an audit client of your firm. And finally, although not listed here, you need to ensure that your contact details for the receipt of independence checks are up to date. So thank you for watching this webinar. I hope that's been informative. If you do have any further questions on the Kreston independence policies, then you can contact me at andrew.collier@kreston.com. Thank you and goodbye.